Have you ever truly stopped to consider what the weight of a memory is? Not the picture in your mind, but the actual physical pressure it exerts on the soul, or what sound the truth makes when it finally snaps the armor of a lifelong belief, leaving you naked to the cold. I am an old woman now. My hands are spotted and arthritic, but they remember. They remember the feel of rough gauze and slick blood, the frantic rhythm of a dying heart beneath my palm. Before the war, my life was defined by the tangible. As a Red Cross Helferin, I believed in visible wounds. I believed in the clean, pragmatic duty of triage. This one can be saved, this one cannot. I dealt with bone and flesh, with bandages and sterile steel. The boundary between life and death was clear, brutal, but clear. The war taught me that the true wounds are never physical. They are invisible fissures carved into the spirit by propaganda and fear. And the deepest wound of all, the one that never closes, the one that defines you for decades, is the shock of realizing you were wrong. Profoundly, dangerously wrong. It is a curious thing how the world works its magic. I can be sitting here in my quiet room, the sun streaming through the window, and then a shift in the weather will happen. A sudden driving rain, perhaps, and the air becomes heavy. It is not just the smell of wet earth and rain on old stone that takes me back. No, it is the specific, inescapable tang of that dampness mixing with stale disinfectant, boiled root vegetables, and the faint, metallic scent of damp, rusting iron. It is a smell I know in my marrow. It is the smell of Silesia, 1945. And then, just as suddenly, I am not an old woman anymore. I am Helga, 24, caked in mud, shivering and staring down a vacuum of gray certainty. The air hangs thick, heavy with the distant, low thrum of enemy supply lorries and the monotonous, rhythmic drip from the corrugated iron roof of the transit camp. It feels less like a place of healing and more like a waiting room for oblivion. I am numb. The cold has seeped into my bones until they feel brittle and useless. The exhaustion of the retreat, the frostbite, the hunger, the days spent patching up boys who should have still been in school, that exhaustion had burned away all fear, leaving only a cold, defiant reserve. I knew what was coming. We had been told. For years, the radio had hammered the message into us. The Soviets were Bolshevik barbarians. The Americans and Canadians were capitalist warmongers who enjoyed watching us suffer. They delighted in terror, in humiliation. I stood straight, trying to make my slender form seem rigid and unyielding. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. I was ready for the strip search, the interrogation, the brutality, perhaps even the bullet. I would face it with the stoicism of my Valk. I was ushered into a tent. Triage. The floor was packed earth, churned into mud near the entrance. The sounds were muted. The low murmur of foreign tongues, English, Polish, a rasping cough. I stood like a statue, waiting for the harsh command, the shove, the contemptuous glare. Then he approached. Lieutenant Miller, a Canadian Army doctor. The brassard on his sleeve, a startling flash of unfamiliar color against the drab khaki. His face was unremarkable, tired, etched with the same exhaustion I saw in the mirror. But his eyes, they were calm, too calm. I watched him wary, my entire being coiled tight, ready to spring or collapse. He spoke, and the first shock was the language, not the shouted broken German of a triumphant occupier, but clear, measured, accented German. He asked about injuries, ailments. His gaze lingered on my hands, raw and chapped, trembling slightly from the cold and the years of washing in freezing water. I expected him to mock them, perhaps to slap them. Instead, he did the impossible. He took a step back, reached for something on a folding cot, and held it out. A klein, folded wool blanket. It was thick, warm-looking, impossibly soft compared to the ragged wool I had worn for months. Then, from a thermos, he poured a steaming mug of ersatz coffee. The rich, earthy steam hit my face. For the cold, Helferin, he said quietly. His voice was professional, utterly devoid of malice. It was a gesture of such basic, simple human consideration that it acted like a physical blow. I couldn't move. My mind short-circuited. I stared at the mug. The steam fogged my vision. The smell of the coffee was so sharp, so real, so normal asterisk. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. Propaganda screamed in the back of my skull. They are testing you. Helga, do not accept the comforts of the enemy. They will use this against you. I thought of the countless hours I had spent tending to my own men, starving and freezing. While these warmongers bombed our cities, my defiance solidified again. I was ready to spit the coffee back in his face, but my body betrayed me. The tremor in my hands increased. The clean wool blanket was an irresistible siren. I took the mug, my fingers closing around the porcelain, sucking the heat from it as if it were life itself. The bitterness of the chicory and barley was the most wonderful thing I had tasted in months. I drank it slowly, watching him over the rim. He did not watch me. He was already moving on, treating the next prisoner. His professionalism and impersonal shield. That was the first crack, the first tremor beneath the bedrock of my belief. Monsters do not offer warm blankets. Sadists do not worry about frostbite. For the next 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended dread, clinging to my initial hatred like a lifeline. I watched the Allied staff, searching for the cruelty, the depravity, the signs of the moral decay we had been promised. I saw none of it. I saw order, grim, exhausted efficiency. I saw men and women doing a terrible job in a terrible place, focused only on processing the endless stream of humanity flowing through Silesia. They were not smiling. They were not kind. But they were not monsters. They were tired. The true moment of reckoning came on the third night. The rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roofs. A child, a small boy, perhaps 5 years old, separated from his family and housed in the adjacent barracks, took a sudden violent turn. High fever, delirium, meningitis perhaps, or just the virulent combination of malnutrition and filth. The Allied medical staff were already overwhelmed, their resources stretched thin. I watched helpless from my cot as the commotion grew. I heard the boy's mother, a woman I recognized from the journey, weeping hysterically. Suddenly duty, that deep, ingrained vocational impulse, rose up and strangled the voice of ideology in my head. I had been trained for this. I had treated typhus, gangrene, and every form of battlefield horror imaginable. That boy was dying. It did not matter who his parents were, or who my captors were. Only the life mattered. I stood up. My knees were weak, but I walked towards the commotion. I spoke to the nearest guard, my German surprisingly steady. I am a trained Red Cross helper. I know how to manage fever and delirium. Let me help. The guard, a young American, looked startled, then skeptical. He radioed his superior. Minutes later, Lieutenant Miller was there. He recognized me instantly. His tired eyes held no judgment, only clinical focus. He did not hesitate. He did not ask about my loyalties. He did not care about my uniform. He only cared about the child. He led me to the boy's side. The child was burning up. We worked, side by side. I spoke German, rapid-fire instructions to the distraught mother. He spoke hesitant, functional German to me, but mostly we communicated in the universal language of triage, the urgency, the precision, the quick, knowing glances that pass between professionals under pressure. He brought the ice packs. I positioned them correctly. I monitored the pulse. He found the proper dosage of quinine, which was precious. I helped administer it. For hours, we were not German and Canadian. We were 2 doctors, 2 people, fighting a single ancient enemy. Death, the world outside the tent, the war, the hatred, the barbed wire, the lies, all of it ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the boy's ragged breathing, the drip of the IV, and our quiet, shared concentration. Near dawn, the fever broke. Slowly, miraculously, the sweat poured from the child, soaking the cot, but the delirium subsided. He was pale, exhausted, but alive. Lieutenant Miller straightened up, his back cracking. He looked across the small, flickering lantern light at me. The mother was sobbing, but now with relief, her face buried in the child's blanket. He simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. But in that nod, in that shared moment of quiet, profound relief, the last of the iron in my soul melted. It was a recognition, not of my skills or my surrender, but of our shared humanity. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, yes, but also a deep, intrinsic goodness. He was not a capitalist warmonger. He was a man who stayed awake all night to save a German child. He was one of asterisk them, and yet he was exactly like asterisk us. The terrifying, exhilarating truth hit me. The entire framework of my life, the foundation of my loyalty, the purpose of my sacrifice, it was built on a magnificent, murderous lie. The enemy was not a monster. The enemy was just a man with a different uniform, who also felt relief when a child lived. That day in Silesia, I did not lose my life. I lost my certainty. I lost the comforting, simple clarity of hatred. I spent the rest of my life tending to wounds, but I never again saw a clear, distinct line between us and them. The war stripped away my youth, my country, and my innocence, but it gave me one essential, enduring gift: the knowledge that the cleanest lines are drawn not on maps, but in the heart, separating those who choose cruelty from those who choose compassion. That single act, the quiet offering of a warm blanket and a mug of bitter coffee, it stained my soul with a truth that decades of propaganda could never wash away. That truth is the heaviest memory I carry. It is the scar that defines me. I learned that war is not a struggle between good and evil nations. It is a tragedy of human beings on all sides, doing terrible things, yes, but also capable of simple, quiet decency in the darkest hour. And the true battle is always internal. The choice between maintaining a comforting hatred or facing the terrifying, vulnerable ambiguity of shared humanity. So when the world tries to simplify things for you, when the voices of certainty start to scream, listen instead for the quiet sound of a cup being set down on a muddy floor. Look for the small, unexpected kindness. That is where the light gets in. That is the only place where true healing begins.